From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The United States government conducts targeted strikes against specific al-Qaeda terrorists, sometimes using remotely piloted aircraft, often referred to publicly as drones.
The White House assassination team, President Obama's counterterrorism chief, John Brennan's, heading up a new team to determine who should be targeted by armed U.S. drones overseas. We'll speak with investigative blogger Marcy Wheeler. Then the Senate moves closer to renewing a series of controversial measures that allow the government to monitor your emails and phone calls.
I think the surveillance has increased. In fact, I would suggest that they've assembled on the order of 20 trillion transactions about U.S. citizens with other U.S. citizens.
We'll speak with targeted NSA whistleblower William Binney and to the ACLU's Michelle Richardson. Then Egypt votes for president.
This is the very first time in Egyptian history since pharaohs and so on that we do vote for our president.
But with the enthusiasm comes anxiety as well.
I have very low hopes of the whole process. I see it as non-democratic. I see that the transformation has been deformed by the SCAF. The whole transformation has been built wrong. We should have had a constitution before a president and elections.
Sharif Abdelkader speaks with voters in Cairo. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Voters are heading to the polls for the second day in Egypt's first competitive presidential election following the ouster of Hosni Mubarak 15 months ago. The first day of voting saw numerous reports of minor violations, but was largely held as free of fraud and violence. Ahmed Shafiq, Mubarak's last prime minister, now a leading candidate, was swarmed by protesters outside his polling station who hurled shoes and debris at him. We'll have more on Egypt later in the broadcast. European leaders have wrapped up a regional summit in Brussels without agreement on a response to the sovereign debt crisis that threatens to tear apart the Eurozone. A dispute has opened up between German Chancellor Angela Merkel and newly inaugurated French President François Hollande over Hollande's call for Eurobonds to help member states with crushing debt. Ahead of the upcoming Greek elections, the president of the European Council, Herman Van Rompuy, said the European Union expects Greece to adopt the austerity measures required for loans.
We will ensure that European structural funds and instruments are mobilized to bring Greece on a path towards growth and job creation. Continuing the vital reforms to restore debt sustainability, foster private investment, and reinforce its institutions is the best guarantee for a more prosperous future in the euro area. We expect that after the elections, the new Greek government will make that choice.
In Mexico, an arrest has been made in the 2006 killing of independent U.S. journalist Brad Will. The 36-year-old Will was shot and killed while covering the popular uprising against Oaxaca, then Oaxaca Governor Ulises Ruiz. Will's own camera captured the shooting with armed men firing into the crowd from a distance. On Wednesday, Oaxaca Attorney General Manuel de Jesus Lopez said the findings of a human rights group had helped solve the case.
Se agotó una línea de investigación que no había sido explorada. ¿Sí?
We followed a line of investigation which hadn't previously been explored, a hypothesis that had been provided by the National Commission for Human Rights at the time, and, as it has been explained, when that line of investigation was followed, we arrived at the same hypothesis. But it was also strengthened throughout the course of the investigation with the testimony of eyewitnesses.
The suspect has been identified as Lenin Osorio. Oaxacan prosecutors had previously charged a Mexican activist for the killing, but Brad Will's own family had been among those to call for the activist's release. Jose Luis Garcia of the Oaxaca Teachers Union called the arrest a vindication for the group.
Once again, we have to say that this is a victory for the teachers, in that today they have in custody the man believed to be responsible for the murder of American Brad Will, which took place in 2006. The teachers' union repeatedly said that our companion, Juan Manuel Martinez Moreno, was innocent.
Brad Will's supporters have long believed pro-government paramilitaries were responsible for his killing, saying images captured at the scene show government and police officials shooting directly at demonstrators. President Obama delivered a commencement address to graduating Air Force cadets in Colorado Wednesday by touting his administration's policy and declaring, quote, a new era of American leadership. In his remarks, Obama said he'd shored up so-called U.S. exceptionalism by winding down the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
With confidence and pride, the United States is stronger and safer and more respected in the world. Because even as we've done the work of ending these wars, we've laid the foundation for a new era of American leadership. And now, cadets, we have to build it. We have to build on it. You have to build on it.
Two top lawmakers have warned Pakistan over the sentencing of a doctor who ran a fake vaccination campaign to help the CIA locate Osama bin Laden. The doctor, Shakil Afridi, was sentenced to 30 years in prison this week for setting up the vaccination effort in an attempt to get DNA from the bin Laden family. In a statement, Senators John McCain of Arizona and Carl Levin of Michigan, the ranking members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, said Afridi's imprisonment could, quote, diminish Congress's willingness to provide financial assistance to Pakistan. At the State Department, spokesperson Victoria Nuland was questioned on the Obama administration's handling of Afridi's case.
Since he was helping the U.S. On various matters and the CIA, how come you left him to die or to be in prison to sentenced by the Pakistanis on treason and other charges? How come you didn't give him some kind of protection or just like the Chinese Mr. Chen, just like him, to bring him somewhere, give him some safe haven rather than leaving him behind?
I think we've said that we don't see any basis for what's happened here, and so, we will continue to make those representations to the government of Pakistan.
A new poll shows U.S. support for same-sex marriage is at an all-time high. According to the Washington Post and ABC News, 53% of Americans say gay marriage should be legal, while a record low 36% say it should not be allowed. The findings come shortly after President Obama declared his support for same-sex marriage earlier this month. A protest is being organized outside a North Carolina church this Sunday after the church's pastor called for placing gay men and lesbians inside a concentration camp. The Reverend Charles Worley made the remarks in a Mother's Day address to the Province Road Baptist Church.
I figured a way to get rid of all lesbians and queers, but I couldn't get it passed through Congress. Build a great, big, large fence, 50 or 100 mile long, put all the lesbians in there, fly over and drop some food. Do the same thing with the queers and the homosexuals, and have that fence electrified till they can't get out. Feed them, and you know what? In a few years they'll die out. Do you know why? They can't reproduce.
Worley's sermon was delivered just days after North Carolina voters passed a gay marriage ban. A group calling itself Catawba Valley Citizens Against Hate says it will picket Worley's church on Sunday. Facebook investors have filed a class-action lawsuit in New York federal court claiming the tech giant misstated facts and concealed relevant information about the company's financial prospects ahead of a public offering. Plaintiffs say they have lost more than $2.5 billion as Facebook shares plunged in the days after the company went public. Another lawsuit has reportedly been filed in California against Facebook, several executives and underwriting firms. The financial firm Morgan Stanley is facing scrutiny from regulators for its role in the offering. Salvatore Graziano, an attorney for a plaintiff, said investors were misled.
When you go public, when you raise money in the market, you are required to disclose material information. Here, what apparently happened, what's being discussed, is that there was information put in the prospectus which was vague. And then separately, people at Facebook, allegedly, were talking to Morgan Stanley and the other underwriters, giving them more information, adverse information, and that's what these cases are about.
The tech giant Hewlett-Packard has announced a new round of job cuts amidst declining profits. On Wednesday, HP said it'll slash 27,000 jobs, or 8% of its workforce. The head of the Secret Service appeared before Congress Wednesday to publicly apologize for the Colombian prostitution scandal for the first time. Secret Service Director Mark Sullivan spoke at a hearing of the Senate Homeland Security Committee.
Clearly, the misconduct that took place in Cartagena, Colombia, is not representative of these values or of the high ethical standards we demand from our nearly 7,000 employees. I am deeply disappointed, and I apologize for the misconduct of these employees and the distraction that it has caused.
7 people were injured after a fire broke out Wednesday on a nuclear-powered submarine at a naval shipyard in Maine. The fire reportedly did not damage the nuclear reactor, which was inactive at the time. The cause of the blaze is under investigation. A British journalist has accused CNN host Piers Morgan of teaching him how to hack into other people's phones a decade ago. BBC journalist Jeremy Paxman told a judicial inquiry into media standards that Piers Morgan had boasted in 2002 about how easy it was to access the voicemail of other people's cell phones. At the time, Piers Morgan was the editor of the British tabloid The Daily Mirror after previously editing Rupert Murdoch's News of the World. Piers Morgan now hosts CNN's Piers Morgan Tonight. He has previously denied authorizing phone hacking. And members of Occupy Wall Street say they plan to file a lawsuit against the city of New York today in federal court seeking redress for destruction of the People's Library. With thousands of books, the library was a proud fixture of the occupation of Zuccotti Park, which came to be known as Liberty Square. But protesters say books, along with other materials and equipment, were destroyed when the police raided the encampment in the middle of the night, November 15th. In a statement, activists said the raid, quote, struck not only at constitutional rights, but at a fundamental tool of enlightenment. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. As President Obama expands the use of armed drones to assassinate suspects overseas, the White House is reportedly taking up a key role in determining who should be targeted. Since Obama has taken office, deadly drone strikes have been carried out in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Somalia. According to the Associated Press, a small team at the White House, led by counterterror chief John Brennan, has taken the lead for drafting lists of individuals to target. One official said there is a growing concern over, quote, how easy it has become to kill someone under the administration's drone strike policy. Late last month, Brennan publicly confirmed that the United States has used drones to conduct targeted killings overseas.
President Obama believes that done carefully, deliberately, and responsibly, we can be more transparent and still ensure our nation's security. So let me say it as simply as I can. Yes, in full accordance with the law, and in order to prevent terrorist attacks on the United States and to save American lives, the United States government conducts targeted strikes against specific al-Qaeda terrorists, sometimes using remotely piloted aircraft, often referred to publicly as drones. And I'm here today because President Obama has instructed us to be more open with the American people about these efforts.
That was John Brennan, President Obama's top counterterrorism advisor. The newly revealed procedure for drone attacks means Brennan's staff consults the Pentagon, the State Department, and other agencies in deciding who will be targeted. According to the Associated Press, this makes a military-run review process in place since 2009 less relevant. Pentagon spokesperson George Little has defended the program, saying the department was, quote, entirely comfortable with the process by which American counterterrorism operations are managed. For more, we turn to Marcy Wheeler, an investigative blogger who runs the website emptywheel.net. Marcy, welcome to Democracy Now! Talk about the significance of John Brennan being at the hub, being in charge of, well, what would you call this, a White House assassination team?
You're right. I think we're now calling Brennan the assassination czar. There are a couple of factors to this, Amy. I think one is the suggestion that the recommendation of who to have on the assassination list is going to come from other entities. The AP describes it as coming from other agencies, possibly the State Department. But that means it's coming from people that aren't the special forces guys on the ground in Yemen. It may mean, and we'll get back to this, but it may mean that it's coming from Saudi Arabia. The other thing is, it's unclear whether these assassination strikes are going to be overseen by the Senate Intelligence Community or by the Armed Services Committees. In other words, it's unclear what kind of oversight there will be, and since the Congress has a very difficult time subpoenaing or getting testimony from the National Security Council, it may mean that there is much less oversight for what's going on. And then finally, the clip you had with John Brennan, he kept emphasizing that these are targeted strikes, but the decision, as the AP reported it, the decision of this happened not yesterday, but actually in April, around April 22nd. And that means it coincides with the decision that the White House made to embrace not just personality strikes, but signature strikes, which means we're shooting drones at people whose identity we don't actually know. We're shooting at them because they look like terrorists from the sky, because they seem to have certain levels of security. In other words, Brennan was not telling the full truth when he said that these are targeted killings. What they are, in fact, are not targeted. We don't know who we're shooting at. And the fact that that's all brought into the White House all at the same time, I think, really means we've lowered the level at which we're targeting people in Yemen, and probably means it's going to be a lot easier for us to target not al-Qaeda members in Yemen, but insurgents who really aren't trying to target the United States, but are instead fighting the government of Yemen.
Marcy Wheeler, you mentioned Saudi Arabia as possibly being involved in helping to identify targets. Now, Brennan used to be a station chief for the CIA in Saudi Arabia and is supposedly close to Saudi intelligence, the intelligence machinery of the Saudi state. Could you talk about Saudi Arabia's role in this, for what we know?
Right. Yeah. Well, we don't know, I mean, for sure about the drone strikes, but if you recall, after the Undie bomb plot was revealed a couple weeks ago, and that actually was delivered up to us in this same week where the White House embraced signature strikes, when John Brennan started managing the targeting of these things. So that all happened around April 20th, April 22nd.
And remind us of what the Undie bomb plot was.
Right. It was a Saudi infiltrator until al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and he brought out a similar bomb to the one that Umar Farouk Abdulmutallab used in the Christmas Day bombing in Detroit. He was under Saudi, he was being managed by the Saudis the entire time. He was able to bring the bomb out. The FBI has it. They're doing analysis. But that plot was revealed to John Brennan, at least, to the U.S. at least, back in April, probably around April 20th. So this is all happening around the same time. The Saudis, deliver us this alleged terrorist plot, and then around the same time we decide we're going to change the way we're targeting people in Yemen. And at the same time, in the discussions of this Undie bomb plot, there were Saudi sources who were saying, we're the ones who pinpoint, we're the ones who provide the human intelligence on the ground for what you're doing in Yemen. And that's particularly concerning because the Saudis not only have very different interests in Yemen than we do. This is their backyard. They're worried about the instability in the Middle East generally. They have a big push against the Arab Spring. Their installment of the current President Hadi in Yemen is part of that. In addition, they've struck at Houthi rebels in the north of Yemen as recently as 2010. And when they were doing that, they actually asked us, well, if we had drone strikes, our targeting against these Houthi rebels would be more accurate. So they've got far different interests in Yemen than we do, and they're running around saying, we're the ones providing human intelligence for the targeting that you guys are doing in Yemen.
Marcia, I want to turn to a comment Attorney General Eric Holder made in March when he outlined what the White House billed as the legal rationale for its claimed right to kill U.S. citizens who belong to al-Qaeda or associated forces.
It is an unfortunate but undeniable fact that some of the threats that we face come from a small number of United States citizens who have decided to commit violent attacks against their own country from abroad, based on generations-old legal principles and Supreme Court decisions handed down during World War II, as well as during this current conflict. It's clear that United States citizenship alone does not make such individuals immune from being targeted.
Marcy Wheeler, your response.
Well, what he was talking about ostensibly was the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, Anwar al-Awlaki's 16-year-old American citizen son, Abdul Rahman, and also Samir Khan, also an American citizen. So he was trying to say, well, we okay using drone strikes against American citizens if they reach a certain level of being involved with al-Qaeda. Now, Abdul Rahman, the 16-year-old, there's no evidence that he had any active, I mean, he was a 16-year-old kid playing soccer like everybody else. But as the government moves drones to the U.S. And they're rolling out drones in civilian airspace, you got to really wonder what the legal basis for using drones is, and whether after he made those comments, a number of people in Congress asked him, or asked Robert Mueller, the FBI director, whether the U.S. could use drone strikes in the United States, and they really didn't answer that. They kind of said, well, you got to ask you got to ask DOJ, and we still don't have any answer to that. Ron Wyden, the senator from Oregon, has said he doesn't know, and he's actually on the Intelligence Committee. So we don't know even whether the government claims they could use drones against American citizens in the United States.
Marcy Wheeler, the people you're all talking about were killed by drone strikes in Yemen, the poorest country in the Arab world, despite receiving over $300 million in military and security aid from the United States over the last 5 years. Much of that money has gone into an aggressive and controversial counterterrorism campaign rather than programs of humanitarian relief. We recently spoke to Democracy Now! Correspondent Jeremy Scahill, who had just returned from Yemen. He said U.S. counterterrorism operations have ignited an Islamist uprising in the country.
The Obama administration began an air war in Yemen. Sometimes the strikes hit the people that were the intended targets, but oftentimes civilians were killed. And so what happened is that the prophecy envisioned by the leaders of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and envisioned by Anwar al-Awlaki came true, and that was that the United States intended to turn Yemen into its next Afghanistan, its next Iraq, its next Pakistan. So you had the 1-2 punch, or actually there were 3 punches. The first one is the airstrikes. The second one is supporting Saleh family military units. And then the third is not funding any humanitarian programs and allowing the vast majority of the U.S. money to go toward units which were then used as agents of domestic repression.
Independent journalist Jeremy Scahill. Marcy Wheeler, can you continue to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, two more things to add to that. One is the State Department just released a kind of talk sheet of aid that goes to Yemen, and what it actually shows is for things like humanitarian aid, it's going down, whereas military aid is going up. And so I really think we need to be asking how much we're sucking dry what little humanitarian aid we're giving to Yemen, and instead putting it in drone strikes. But the other thing is, and Jeremy, I think, mentioned this on the program when he was there, is that one of the reasons why al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is having some success is because they're kind of taking the same approach that the Taliban or the Hezbollah did, which is they're providing services. They're trying to turn the electricity on. And if we're bombing them and al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is turning on the electricity, we're going to have a really hard time winning that battle for hearts and minds, because we're not providing the really basic things that people need. And instead, since this new drone targeting procedure rolled out on the 15th, I think, we've already killed a number of civilians. So, you know, we're still killing civilians at the same time as al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is trying to turn the electricity on.
Marcy, John Brennan spoke late last month at the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Center for Scholars, and he was disrupted by Medea Benjamin of Code Pink. Let's go to a clip of that incident.
Over the years, Well, how many people are you willing to sacrifice? Why are you lying to the American people and not saying how many innocents have been killed? I speak
Thank you, ma'am, for expressing your views. There will be time for questions and answers after the presentation.
In Pakistan, who is killed because he wanted to document the drone strikes. I speak out on behalf of Abdul Rahman al-Awaki, 16-year-old born in Denver, killed in Yemen just because his father was someone we don't like. I speak out on behalf of the Constitution, on behalf of the rule of law. I love the rule of law. I love my country. You are making us less safe by killing so many innocent people.
For our radio listeners, as Medea Benjamin was speaking for those last 30 seconds, she was being actually dragged and lifted up in the air by a security guard and removed from the offices of the Woodrow Wilson Center, from the auditorium. Marcy, your response, and also could you talk a little bit about Brennan's role prior to becoming counterterrorism chief? Under the Bush administration, he had been in the CIA, been a supporter of enhanced interrogation techniques.
Right. Medea Benjamin's interruption, right after she was pulled away, John Brennan picked up his speech again, and if I recall, it was something like, oh, and al-Qaeda keeps killing other people. And it was this wonderful contrast because she had just listed all these people that we've killed, including citizens. And Brennan just kept going, suggesting that it was al-Qaeda who was killing citizens after she had just made it clear that that's not all that was going on. Brennan, yeah, right. And he was at the CIA until, I want to say, 2004, 2005, when he was a contractor after that. In addition to being a supporter of enhanced interrogation, he also was involved in the targeting for Cheney's illegal wiretapping program. So he's got a lot of complicity with some of the things that were done in the Bush administration. And as you already pointed out, he was the Riyadh station chief going back into the 90s. So he's got ties to the CIA in the region going back some time and to a lot of the illegal things that were started under the Bush administration.
And as Glenn Greenwald has pointed out, Brennan's support of enhanced interrogation techniques forced him to withdraw from consideration as President Obama's CIA director because of the controversy that swirled around that.
And so one of the things we've got now is that had he been CIA director, he would have been running these targeted strikes or these not targeted strikes with oversight from Congress. But now that he's running the Yemen war from inside the NSC, it's not entirely clear whether he'll have any oversight. Same guy running the war as we otherwise would have had, except that it's buried in the White House, so it's going to be less accessible to oversight.
Marcy Wheeler, we want to thank you for being with us, investigative blogger who runs EmptyWheel.net, speaking to us from Chicago. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute.
You have understood, whoa, the riddles of the ages. Yes, and you have understood the universal mind. You have placed your footprints on the everlasting sands of time. Yeah, so tell me why can't you understand that there ain't no such thing as a Superman? There ain't no such thing as a Superman. You was on it now. You went to
Gil Scott Heron here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, the Senate is moving closer to renewing a series of controversial measures that critics say allows government agencies, including the National Security Agency, to monitor your emails and phone calls. Earlier this week, the Democratic-led Senate Select Committee on Intelligence sought to extend controversial amendments to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act that were set to expire at the end of this year. The amendments were passed in the wake of the Bush administration's wireless domestic surveillance scandal. Democratic Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon and Mark Udall of Colorado opposed the extension on civil liberties grounds. Wyden said he was concerned that the provision would allow the emails and phone calls of innocent U.S. citizens to be monitored without a warrant. The Senate is also set to vote soon on the Cyberintelligence Sharing and Protection Act, a bill opposed by many civil liberties and privacy groups.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to hear a case to decide the constitutionality of the growing surveillance state. The case involves a group of activists, journalists, and lawyers represented by the American Civil Liberties Union who sued over the U.S. government's surveillance practices, which they say could pick up their communications with clients and sources overseas. To talk about these developments, we're joined by two guests. William Binney, National Security Agency whistleblower who served in the agency for nearly 40 years before resigning over the NSA's role in domestic surveillance after the September 11th attacks. He's warned that the NSA's data mining program has become so vast it could, quote, create an Orwellian state. And we're joined in Washington, D.C. by Michelle Richardson. She's the Legislative Counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union. We're going to turn first to William Binney. Can you talk about these latest developments in the legislation?
Well, in my mind, this is a continuation of the mindless legislation that our Congress has been putting out just to justify what they've been doing for a decade or more. Instead of trying to use discipline and living up to their oath of office to defend the Constitution, they've decided to violate the civil liberties and the rights of all U.S. citizens. And that's what's going on here. That's what the Patriot Act Section 215 is about. That's what they've been doing. And what's happening is they're destroying the strength of this nation, which is the freedom and liberties that the citizens have to do things. And when they do that,
Michelle Richardson, could you talk a little bit about the extension and what it means, but particular aspects of it?
Yes. In 2008, Congress passed the FISA Amendments Act, which legalized warrantless wiretapping and allows the government to get year-long orders to pick up international communications, even if you're not suspected of doing anything wrong. And that's emails, texts, internet communications, phone calls. And it's going to sunset at the end of the year, and Congress needs to reauthorize it. And it's taken that first step, and the Senate Intelligence Committee secretly voted earlier this week to report out a bill to authorize it for another 5 years. That text is not available, but we understand that they're not going to insert privacy protections, and they are not planning on holding any public oversight hearings or calling the administration to testify publicly to better explain how this current program is affecting Americans.
And when you say the text is not available, will it ever be available, or are you saying that they are recommending a bill that the public will never be able to see?
It will eventually become available, and most likely they will just switch out the words 2012 for 2017. And what we're asking is that they slow down this process and start first with the question, what type of information are they picking up? How many Americans are being affected? What is the government doing with it? And then they can decide how to build in protections into this warrantless wiretapping protection that would better protect Americans' Fourth Amendment rights. But right now, this is premature, and Congress should not be moving forward already with a reauthorization.
Michelle Richardson, can you talk about the ACLU lawsuit regarding the provision, which is now going to be heard by the Supreme Court?
Yes, the day that George Bush signed this bill into law, the ACLU sued and challenged the constitutionality of the law. The case is called Amnesty v. Clapper, and we represent Amnesty International and other organizations that work overseas and in conflict zones who reasonably believe that their communications are being caught up in these NSA dragnets and have a reasonable fear, and it's having a chilling effect on the work they're doing overseas. They're very important work. So that was 4 years ago, and the case is just getting to the Supreme Court, and they are just deciding whether our clients will have standing. We're very far away from getting to the merits of the case. If the Supreme Court decides in our favor, it goes all the way back to the beginning, and then we'll probably talk about state secrets and not get to an actual ruling on whether this sort of mass, suspicionless wiretapping of Americans is constitutional for many years, which underscores why it's so important for Congress to get this right. It's going to be a very long time before the courts get through all of the processes to actually decide these sorts of cases, if they ever do. So it's critical that Congress build in all of these protections. They're really the only step here to protect us.
I want to go to a clip of a Democratic Congress member, Hank Johnson, questioning NSA Director General Keith Alexander in March. He asked whether the NSA has the ability to spy on Americans who might hypothetically send insulting emails about former Vice President Dick Cheney.
An American emailing another American about Dick Cheney. And does the NSA have capacity to find out who those parties are by monitoring, by the content of their email?
No. In the United States, we would have to go through an FBI process, a warrant, to get that and serve it to somebody to actually get it.
I see, but you do have the capability of doing it.
Not in the United States.
Not without a warrant.
No, no. We don't have the technical insights in the United States. In other words, you have to have something to intercept or some way of doing that, either by going to a service provider with a warrant, or you have to be collecting in that area. We're not authorized to collect, nor do we have the equipment in the United States to actually collect that kind of information.
That was Georgia Democratic Congressmember Hank Johnson questioning NSA Director General Kevin Alexander. Alexander actually denies the NSA has the technology to intercept emails sent by Americans to other Americans. William Binney, your response?
That really flies in the face of that NSA room in the AT&T building in San Francisco that's hooked up to the wires or where the optical fiber is inside the United States. With that NERIS device, that right there is capability to collect inside this country. And besides, if you wanted to find somebody who was talking about Cheney and hunting accidents, all you'd have to do is put in the words Cheney, hunting, shooting, and look for combinations like that in text. And then that would pull that out. That's a simple process to find that kind of stuff.
Now, William Binney, just for listeners and viewers who didn't happen to see you on Democracy Now! A few weeks ago when you were in New York in this extended broadcast we did, your own experience in calling out the NSA has been extremely traumatic for you and for your family, for your wife, for your son, as the FBI raided your house. You had worked at the NSA for nearly 40 years, including time as technical director of the NSA's World Geopolitical and Military Analysis Reporting Group. And since you quit right after 9/11 in October, you've warned the NSA's data mining program has become so vast it could create an Orwellian state. When did the FBI raid your house?
That was 26 July of 2007.
This was the time when you were calling attention to your concerns about the NSA spying on Americans to the Pentagon Inspector General and to his Senate Oversight Committee?
Yes, we've done that. And also, Kirk Wiebe and I had written letters or composed emails to send to Congress and talk to representatives in Congress, trying to alert them to the dangers of this. I would like to point out one thing of why they're not building in privacy protections for U.S. citizens. Because if they do that, it means one basic thing, that they can't target U.S. citizens inside the country. They cannot just go in and target them because they're doing something they don't like. If their attributes are all encrypted and they're protected, you can't tell who you're looking at, and so therefore you can't go into your databases and pull out material about them. So that basically makes it impossible to target individual U.S. citizens within this country unless you build probable cause and get a decrypt. Then you can do that.
And William Binney, you had contact with some members of the intelligence committees of the House and Senate. Why do you think there is such reluctance, except for a few individuals, to actually challenge this out of control trend of the government to continually intercept and view what Americans are doing?
Well, I don't believe those committees or anybody in Congress really understands that it's possible to detect terrorist activities or illegal activity even when you protect the identities of U.S. citizens. You can still build probable cause by looking at the unique activity of uniquely encrypted attributes. That will tell you or give you an idea of what they're up to or all about, and then you could build probable cause and take it to a court to get a decrypt of that information and then target them. I don't believe they understand that you can still do that even if it's encrypted.
I want to go to a clip of National Security Agency whistleblower Thomas Drake. He worked for the NSA for nearly 7 years before blowing the whistle. Thomas Drake appeared on Democracy Now! In March.
The critical thing that I discovered was not just the massive fraud, waste, and abuse, but also the fact that NSA had chosen to ignore a 23-year legal regime which had been established in 1978 called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and which at NSA during the time that I was not only NSA but also in the military flying on RC-135s overseas during the latter part of the Cold War. It was a contract. The one thing you did not do, it was the prime directive of NSA. It was the First Amendment at NSA, which is you do not spy on Americans.
And what'd you find?
Without a warrant. I found, much to my horror, that they had tossed out that legal regime. That it was the excuse of 9/11, which I was told was exigent conditions now prevailed. We essentially can do anything. We opened up Pandora's box. We're going to turn the United States of America into the equivalent of a foreign nation for the purpose of dragnet blanket electronic surveillance.
Was NSA whistleblower Thomas Drake on Democracy Now! In March. He was prosecuted by the Obama administration after challenging mismanagement, waste, and possible constitutional violations at the National Security Agency. Ultimately, they had to drop all the charges. He pled guilty to a lower charge under enormous pressure. William Binney, you're one of the whistleblowers of this smaller group of whistleblowers who has not been charged. Your response to what he's saying?
Well, I mean, that's what he said was one of the primary reasons I left NSA. I mean, we were collecting data on virtually every U.S. citizen in the country, and so I couldn't participate in that. I couldn't be an accessory to subversion of the Constitution and subverting the constitutional rights of every U.S. citizen. So I had to go, and that's the reason I left. But like I say, I left a system that they used that system that I built to target U.S. citizens. But when I left it there, I had built in protections, but it meant that for them, they could not use my system that way and target U.S. citizens, so they had to remove the protections to make that possible. Well, that's why I say Congress needs to build in those protections. If they do, then they cannot just randomly target any U.S. citizen they want.
Well, one of the leading critics of the growing surveillance state has been Oregon Democratic Senator Ron Wyden. In May of last year, he accused the Obama administration of relying on a secret law to expand domestic surveillance. He's now opposing the renewal of the FISA amendments and the Cyber Information Sharing and Protection Act. On Monday, he explained his opposition to SISPA.
As an attempt to protect our networks from real cyber threats, SISPA is an example of what not to do. SISPA repeals important provisions of existing electronic surveillance law that have been on the books for years without instituting corresponding privacy, confidentiality, and civil liberties safeguards. It creates uncertainty in place of trust. It erodes statutory and constitutional civil rights protections, and it creates a surveillance regime in place of a targeted, nimble cybersecurity program that is needed to truly protect our nation.
Michelle Richardson, Legislative Counsel for the ACLU, your response on the issue of CISPA.
Well, Senator Wyden is right. CISPA is an absolute privacy disaster. We were very disappointed that it passed through the House a few weeks ago, but we were very heartened that so many people voted no. 168 people voted no, including 28 Republicans. Very important members like Adam Schiff and Anna Eshoo, who have intelligence cred and experience in the technology field, said that it just went too far and allowed the government too much spying authority and too little accountability for those programs. So now the question is, what will the Senate do? And I think it's safe to say that it's unlikely that CISPA itself will come up in the Senate. And right now, staff is feverishly working to come up with some sort of alternative and find something that can pass that 60-vote threshold to come to the floor. And the privacy issues are in play. We are actually optimistic that a better bill will emerge over there because of the work by members of Wyden, but also Mr. Franken and Mr. Durbin. And hopefully we'll keep moving in the right direction on cybersecurity. It's going to be a big summer for surveillance. Between big votes on cybersecurity and FISA, these members are going to be making some very serious Fourth Amendment decisions in the months to come.
Michelle Richardson, I want to thank you very much for being with us, Legislative Counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union. And William Binney served in the NSA for nearly 40 years, including time as Technical Director of the NSA's World Geopolitical and Military Analysis Reporting Group. He retired soon after the September 11th attacks. He retired in October, warning the NSA's data mining program is becoming so vast it could create an Orwellian state. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. When we come back, we go to the streets of Cairo. Egypt is voting for president. Stay with us. Aslam by Hamza al-Din, here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We end today's show in Egypt, where voters are heading to the polls for the second day in the country's first competitive presidential election following the ouster of Hosni Mubarak 15 months ago. Authorities have declared today a public holiday to allow public sector workers to vote. Results are expected within the next few days. If no candidate wins above 50% of the vote, a runoff between the top two contenders is scheduled for June 16th.
Democracy Now! Correspondent Sharif Abel-Kadous spent yesterday traveling to polling stations around Cairo, speaking to voters about their choices for president and their concerns in the election. He filed this report.
Election day in Egypt. Millions of voters head to the polls in the country's first ever competitive presidential race. 15 months after 30-year autocrat Hosni Mubarak was forced out of office in a popular uprising, the people of Egypt are deciding who will replace him.
Actually, this is the very first time in Egyptian history since pharaohs and so on that we do vote for our president.
But with the enthusiasm comes anxiety as well. The Supreme Council of Armed Forces has led the country through a turbulent transition, and many questions remain about the military's future role. The president is being elected without a constitution and without clearly delineated powers. Yet for the first time in history, the outcome of Egypt's presidential election is not a foregone conclusion, and it's anyone's guess who will win. Among the leading frontrunners is the Muslim Brotherhood's candidate, Mohammed Morsi. This man says he supports Mohammed Morsi because he will enact Sharia law and has an Islamic political program. Last fall, the Muslim Brotherhood captured more than 40% of the seats in parliamentary elections. Yet some of those who supported the group the first time round are not backing them for the presidency.
I voted for the Brotherhood in the first phase in the parliamentary elections. I can't vote for the Brotherhood now. I am saying my personal opinion. Why? Because we need to have a collection of people in government, Brotherhood and liberals and so on. That is what the Egyptian people are, the different communities we have. I voted for Hamdin Sabahi because he is a moderate. He has no pressures. He wants to serve the Egyptian people.
Also among the frontrunners are two former members of the Mubarak regime, Amr Moussa, who served as Mubarak's foreign minister for 10 years, and Ahmed Shafiq, who was his last prime minister. Voters cited their experience in the former government as reasons to back them. This man says he's voting for Amr Moussa because he spent his whole career in foreign diplomacy and understands how to deal with the country. Ahmed Shafiq understands politics and can bring the country forward, says this voter. Outside another Mbeba polling station, this woman says the incoming president should focus on what poor people want, a life of dignity. Fellow voters nearby nod in agreement, but when she says she voted for Ahmed Shafiq, they burst into a heated argument.
All of the crisis, the woman said, I agreed with, except for Ahmad Shafiq. He is a part of the former regime. Ahmad Shafiq is Mubarak, and Mubarak is Ahmad Shafiq. The man is sticking his tongue out at us. He says he is Mubarak's representative. I vote by exclusion. I exclude Ahmad Shafiq and Amir Moussa, and then any one of the 11 left. Any one of them. Personally, I support Mohamed Morsi, but if Abdel Monem Abal Fattah came, I would be happy. If Hamdim came, I would be happy. If Khalid Ali came, I would also be happy.
Here in Mbeba, as people line outside a school to go into the polling station, some of the main issues of concern are the economy and security. But some of those who took part in protests in Tahrir Square are calling for a deeper change.
There are people who are against change, people who are against Egypt moving forward, people who are against a certain idea prevailing. People say, damn the revolution, that the revolution ruined the country. The revolution made people go down believing in someone. It doesn't matter who. What matters is that people went down to choose someone. The revolution made people think politically. My dad is 60 years old. He never thought politically in his entire life. Now he studies what is good, what is bad. There is awareness. It's like there was an electric shock that made people think. There's something called the economy, the state, security. The revolution made people rise up and open their eyes.
Revolutionary graffiti covers the walls of downtown Cairo. One of them showing the former president Hosni Mubarak and Field Marshal Hussein Tantawi, and behind them two members of the former regime who are running for president today, Amr Moussa and Ahmed Shafiq. This on the corner of the square that is considered the epicenter of the revolution, Tahrir. But some of the revolutionaries who are at the core of this struggle that caused these elections to happen are boycotting today. One of them is Pierre Soufi.
I'm not voting today because I have a problem with voting without a constitution, voting without knowing what the president is going to come and do. What can he do? I mean, what are his responsibilities? So I'm not voting. I have no idea why should anybody vote. I mean, the whole story is just picking a puppet to put, and whoever the puppet is not going to make any difference, I think.
A puppet to who?
A puppet to the military institution. It's not even anymore the SCAF itself. It's the military institution as a whole.
The neighborhood of Shubra lies just north of Tahrir Square. It's home to more than 3 million residents, including the largest concentration of Copts, Egypt's Christian minority. Residents spoke about their concerns on election day.
أنا اخترت مرشح مدني علشان أنا شايف إن هو ده يصلح إنه يكون رئيس جمهورية.
I chose a civil candidate because I saw that he would fit to be a president. I think that the most important thing in the country is that there is some justice, because there is a lot of sectarian racism because of religion and class differences. That's why no one gets their rights in the country. So we need someone who is not partial to a specific religion.
Another Shubra resident explained why he was backing Amr Musa.
He is the most preferable because he is a civil man. He is not from the military or the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood say things and then go back on their word. They said they only wanted some of Parliament, but look how much they took. When it is a civil country, I will feel that it is not military nor Brotherhood, so I will be at peace.
Just across the river from Shubra is the upper-scale neighborhood of Zamalek. Voters here also voiced concerns about the rise of Islamist politics in post-Mubarak Egypt.
I don't want our leader to be someone who is biased or have any preferences. I want someone who is a representative of the Egyptian culture and the simple Egyptian mentality, who can represent and give minorities as well as majorities their rights, and someone who does not invest his time in things that are, at the end of the day, very private. Just for me, that is religion.
It is necessary I vote for Amr Musa because he has long experience in international, regional, and Arab diplomacy. He is a man of the world and understands the administration of a country's affairs. It's possible to say he can balance between political Islam that is ruling our legislative branch and the People's Assembly and the Shura Council.
Abdel Menam Abel Fatouh is another Islamist candidate who has gained support from across the political spectrum, from secular liberals to conservative Muslims. Tariq Hamdi says he's voting for him to reject the Muslim Brotherhood's candidate.
Let's say it's a strategic vote because I think, honestly, the 13 candidates are not the best. We are choosing the best of the worst, if we may say so. So in this case, definitely, I believe from the studies I have made and the people I have talked with that he has the biggest chances.
Other voters are backing Hamdin Sabahi, a longtime opponent of the Mubarak regime and the founder of a Nasserist political party.
He's the only revolutionary candidate. We're definitely not voting for the old regime, and we're definitely not voting for the people vocaling religious state. So the only candidate available for that option is Hamdin Sabahi. I have very low hopes of the whole process. I see it as non-democratic. I see that the transformation has been deformed by the SCAF. The whole transformation has been built wrong. We should have had a constitution before a president and elections. We're going to face this month first phase of elections, second phase of elections, the court order for Mubarak, the handover of authority that we're clearly seeing signals of the military establishment not willing to transform this authority to a civilian rule. We're looking at a very tense month that can be extremely explosive. Hopefully it passes the right way, it passes the revolution way, it passes the way that serves the people the best.
Vote tallying in Egypt's presidential election begins today, shortly after the polls close. Speculation is rife over whom will come out on top. If no candidate wins more than 50%, a likely runoff will be held next month, with the final result announced on June 21st. For the winner, a turbulent future awaits. For Democracy Now!, I'm Sharif Abdul Quddus with Hani Masoud in Cairo, Egypt.
And that does it for our broadcast. To get a copy, you can go to our website at democracynow.org. Tune in Monday for our Memorial Day special. Honor the dead, heal the wounded, stop the wars. Veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan return their medals at the NATO summit to the generals. They hurl them at the gate, the full ceremony. That's Monday on Democracy Now! Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Aaron Montagne, Nermeen Sheikh, Steve Martinez, Sam Alkoff, Hani Masood, Robbie Karen, Dina Guster, Chantal Berman, Nancy Kong, Amy Littlefield, Mike DeFilippo, and Miguel Noguera, our engineers. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby, Hugh Grant, Jessica Lee, John Wallach, and our camera crew, John Randolph, Karen Crick Meadows, Raquel Penny, and Carla DeJesus. Again, our website, democracynow.org. You can read the transcripts, you can listen, and you can watch. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.